Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to be looking at international economic statecraft today, but definitely not as some dry, boring policy document. Think of it more like a high-stakes, multiplayer strategy game. Because when nations clash today, they don't always send in the troops right away. Often, the actual front lines are financial markets, supply chains, and diplomatic back channels. Today, we're exploring a really fascinating scenario based on some recent analysis. How exactly does a superpower respond when its economic interests are suddenly threatened? So, the specific scenario we are examining starts with a massive opening move, a U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, on the surface, you'd think that mainly targets Iran, right? But the real question we are unpacking today is what happens when Beijing, which is deeply, deeply reliant on that region for energy, decides to play its hand. Because in the modern world, you can inflict absolutely crippling damage on an opponent without ever firing a single conventional weapon. To really understand how China might respond, we're going to walk through 5 distinct options on Beijing's menu. The two-player game, the resource chokehold, the financial nuclear option, the diplomatic shield, and finally, death by 1,000 cuts. Let's get into it. Starting things off with the fundamental premise of this global board game. Part 1, the two-player game. As this brilliant insight from Bloomberg's Javier Blas makes totally explicit, the U.S. blockade is not some isolated event. It's actually a direct move aimed at putting Beijing in a corner. Think of it like a game of chess, where you deliberately trap a knight just to force the king into a vulnerable position. The source material outlines that Washington's logic here is to squeeze Iran by forcing China to share all that economic pain, which theoretically pressures Beijing to step in and push Iran to the negotiating table. But here is where the strategy gets incredibly fascinating. Economic warfare is, by definition, a two-player game. The traditional assumption in Washington is often that things like sanctions, blockades, and tariffs can just be imposed in a vacuum, without triggering a direct response. But as our source highlights, that assumption completely ignores the massive asymmetric leverage that China holds. Beijing isn't just going to sit there and absorb the hit. They have a very robust defense ready to deploy. Which brings us to Section 2, the resource chokehold. So this is China's first set of retaliatory options, and it is a lot like playing a game of Monopoly where your opponent already owns Boardwalk, Park Place, and basically all the vital properties on the board. Just look at the sheer scale of dominance in this visual. China controls an overwhelming 85 to 90% of the world's rare earth processing. If you want to build advanced technology literally anywhere in the world, you almost certainly have to pass through China's toll booth. That's not just a slight market advantage, it's a near monopoly on the building blocks of the entire modern economy. By playing this resource card and tightening export controls, China could trigger immediate, devastating supply crises. We are talking about severely constraining U.S. defense production, stalling out electric vehicle manufacturing, and just halting wind turbine construction altogether. And it goes way beyond just rare earths. China dominates critical minerals like gallium, germanium, antimony, and graphite. Restricting these is honestly like cutting off the oxygen supply to Western technology and military optics. It's an absolutely massive point of leverage. Moving right along to Section 3, the financial nuclear option. So now we're moving from the resource board to the high-stakes poker table of international finance. And this number is just staggering. China currently holds approximately $800 billion in U.S. government bonds. In our economic poker game, this is sitting right in front of Beijing, like a massive, intimidating stack of chips. It represents this deep financial entanglement between the two nations, and it serves as an incredibly powerful, albeit risky, weapon in China's arsenal. If Beijing actually decides to fire this weapon, it triggers a devastating chain reaction. Selling off even a fraction of this debt, say just 10 to 15%, is the nuclear option of finance. If China dumps those bonds, Treasury yields have to spike immediately to attract new buyers. That forces a massive surge in U.S. borrowing costs, which would deeply destabilize global financial markets. Now, doing this definitely hurts China's own reserves too, so it's kind of like flipping the poker table completely over. Everyone gets hurt, but it guarantees mutually destructive pain. But the financial retaliation wouldn't just stop at bonds. China could also weaponize CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system. If you think of the US dollar system as the main casino in town where all global trade currently happens, CIPS is effectively a rival casino they've built right across the street, and it's one where the US dollar is absolutely not accepted and not required. Think about it this way. Currently, the global oil market is heavily dominated by US dollar settlements. But what if Beijing creates a totally new reality by mandating that the world's largest oil import market, which is China, must settle its trades in Chinese renminbi instead of dollars? Beijing would instantly accelerate the structural decline of dollar dominance. It's a move that directly attacks the very foundation of US financial power by pulling liquidity entirely out of the Western system.
Let's look at Section 4, the diplomatic shield.
Now, what if, instead of playing a financial or resource card, China decides to just challenge the referee and rewrite the rulebook entirely? International law is often just a matter of consensus, right? Well, China could unilaterally provide diplomatic cover for Iran by formally recognizing their sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. By doing this, China effectively changes the rulebook. It immediately undermines the legal basis for the U.S. blockade, transforming what the U.S. might call a quote-unquote security operation into what China would formally recognize as an illegal violation of Iranian waters.
And when you combine that diplomatic shield with a Russia-China UN veto, the game changes entirely. You suddenly have this formal great power alignment protecting their ally on the global stage. It effectively blocks the U.S. from gaining any broad international or UN backing, which turns a localized blockade into a deeply entrenched multipolar standoff. So, how will China actually deploy these strategic options to win the match? That brings us to Section 5, death by 1,000 cuts.
We really have to remember that in this high-stakes game, every single move has blowback. Selling treasuries hurts China's own wallet for sure, and banning rare earths completely, well, that just invites the West to quickly build their own mines and cut China out eventually. But Beijing's true power lies in the fact that they do not have to rely on just one card. They have an entire menu of responses to choose from, allowing them to perfectly balance the pain they inflict against the pain they have to absorb.
Therefore, as the source concludes, the most likely response isn't some single massive bear attack. It's a swarm of bees. It's a highly calibrated combination of actions across multiple domains. A slight tightening of rare earths here, a mandated push for CIPS adoption there, coordinated diplomacy with Iran, and maybe just a modest adjustment in treasury holdings. Individually, these things are manageable, but together, they are designed to inflict asymmetric pain and just exhaust the opponent. A true death by 1,000 cuts.
As this explainer shows, the Hormuz blockade forced a confrontation that Beijing probably didn't seek out. But since they have this vast menu of options and are very far from defenseless, it fundamentally reshapes how we need to view international conflicts. If economic warfare truly is a multiplayer game, and China unleashes its swarm of bees, we are left wondering, what exactly is America's next move when the 1,000 cuts begin to bleed? Keep that question in mind as you watch these global events unfold.